Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Behind the Cape. I'm Data Superhero Keith Belanger. I am joined by fellow Data Superhero Julie Heckman. Welcome, Julie. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic. We're here to talk about data governance today, and I think when you think about Snowflake and you think database, data governance doesn't really come to the forefront. But give you a little bit of understanding of data governance in the Snowflake space.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. I think that a lot of people think about all the technical capabilities and the ability to pull data out of Snowflake and use it for different analytical purposes. But kind of overarching all of that is the need for governance. And so
Right.
Snowflake has actually done a really good job of embedding some basic technical governance capabilities within their platform and then exposing them to business users via different tools that are out there.
Yep.
So I think some of the coolest things I think about the Snowflake governance offerings are there's three things essentially. Number one is they have a row access policies, and number two they have column masking policies, and then three they have this automatic classification component that is continually evolving and getting more and more robust over time.
Right. Yeah, and I've been, many years and working with databases. It was always like you have access to the table or you don't. So these types of new features are really interesting. How hard or easy are some of these features to implement?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, from a person that can write SQL, they're a snap. They're just SQL statements. You don't have to have any, access to underlying data files or data structure in any way. What I also love about them is that you don't have to apply them initially. So they can be applied, you're working on a project, you've got your data engineers, you've got your data modelers working together. The business is telling you, I need these columns in this view, I need this information, and then compliance is saying, whoa, 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 not everyone can have access. You can go, okay, great. We're working in dev right now. Let the business analyst and the project management team go ahead and work with compliance, understand what needs to be masked, what should be viewed and accessed by people. Engineers can keep working in dev. They can keep getting everything modeled, keep getting everything written, pipelines, all that good stuff. And then it's just SQL that you lay over the top. And so you can actually apply it in your dev environment just like you would in your production environment, which is fantastic.
Right. So there's no real implication to your physical data structure or your physical data in itself.
There's not, which is
Right.
really great because especially when you think about all the privacy rules that have come about and the differences maybe between the United States and Europe, or even different
Right.
states within the United States. Like California has much more stringent requirements than maybe Missouri, which is where I'm at. And
Right.
so, you can actually change the rules over time
Yeah.
without having to do any physical data changing.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because I know, you know, avoiding doing those physical manipulation of the data or even of the data structures, right? Having a reset that can be very impactful to a project. But to your point, you can let the development continue, and you can kind of evolve those capabilities as the projects evolve, or even as the business things change and rules change. So that's pretty it's pretty interesting. So do you have anything maybe you can show us in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually did a demo a while ago for a Snowflake user group that focuses on Data Vault. And we were just kind of demoing exactly how you would implement some of these row-based policies and column masking policies and how they would even interact together. Because I think one of the things that people don't really think about is, you've got row, you've got column. Well, how would you use them together? Like what would
Right.
be the use cases for each? And they're quite different. And so what's powerful is that since they are different, you can marry them together to create a really, really robust governance process on, a single set of data.
Right. Want me to show
So
you a screen?
yeah, let's flip to my screen.
Great.
And so this is just a slide that I have here. Let me present. I feel like I am. There we go. Sometimes I'm very PowerPoint. Okay, so I did this example. This is an employer contract example. So basically, the data is just employee. employees of a business and when their contracts start and begin and the amount of money that they're paid. And so I just kind of divvied it up. The row-based masking essentially allows you to create different combinations of rows that people are allowed to view in the data. And the column-based masking basically masks those columns that are PII over the entire data set. And
Gotcha.
so you can really mix and match these to create a single view of the data. So your data engineers and your data modelers are going to love this because they're not having to create, 6 different views for all the combinations of access you need.
Great. So like from a row base, that could be t- data from different territories that you might only want to see people from one territory, another type of thing, right?
Exactly, exactly. And so, for example, let's go back and look. This is basically the view that we were looking at. So we have a person, social security number, address, phone, gender, an industry, pay amount, begin and end timestamp. So let's say that maybe you have different industry leaders that are looking at this, and they're only allowed to see certain industries in this in this total data set. You can actually restrict which industry they're allowed to see based on just the value in this data right here. So it does require some coordination, right, between, hey, the modelers are creating this, make sure that the business knows there is some sort of identifiable characteristic in that row. But when you're modeling the data, those are things that are going to come up, right? Your
Right.
business analysts are going to be asking questions about that. That's something that you're going to be understanding.
Right.
So essentially, this is what a row access policy looks like. And it is relatively simple. You can set them up a number of ways. So I had here, these are some generic access that I wanted that I didn't want to have masked by anything. And then I used basically a comparison of a pattern-based approach here. So I took the actual employer code that was in the row and I slapped it onto the role. You can also set up like a reference table that would do this as well. I've seen companies do that, and that works really well. And then you don't have to worry about having a specific pattern for your roles. So it's really flexible in that response. You can put any SQL statement that you want in here. Now,
Gotcha.
the more complex SQL statement you put in does potentially impact performance.
Performance.
Um, I would say that's really only on what I would consider big data tables. If you're
Right.
dealing with a table that's like, I don't know, maybe a million rows, probably not going to see any performance impact.
Right. Right. So this is really making sure if you're going to want to do that separation, you're going to have some type of a role that also is in alignment with that separation. So if you're in region A and region B, you're going to need to have different roles that they know who's coming in and looking at that data.
Exactly, exactly. The roles are really the crux of all of this. So they determine the masking policies and the row access policies are really dependent on those roles.
Gotcha.
And my suggestion is really to have a single role that relates to the policy. I really like to do the inheritance of roles in Snowflake and combinations of
Yep.
roles, such that a role has a function, and then you have maybe a higher level role which rolls up a bunch of functions together. You can kind of mix and match. I think
Yep.
that makes it really powerful, so that then you're not constantly creating new roles each time. So, for
Right.
example, you'd want to have an industry role for um, industry A, industry role for industry B,
Right.
PII role for the table or view, saying like, yes, I can see PII, no, I can't see PII. So
Right.
then you have 4 roles, and you can mix and match them together so that maybe you have an industry A leader that can see PII, and then you have an
Right.
industry A person that cannot see PII.
Right. Makes perfect sense, right? Rather than saying doing the math of every possible
Yes,
combination, you can kind of configure as need be versus
exactly.
having hundreds of thousands of possible pre-built roles. No, that
And
makes
that way
sense.
too, like if you get a new industry or a new thing that you need to provide or row access level to, you can put it in. You don't have to know ahead of time all the possibilities for that table, which I think is really important because as good as we can try to get requirements, we are working in more of an agile world than ever before. I think data is, being pulled along grudgingly sometimes to that,
Yeah.
but I do think it's important that there's no way you're ever going to know everything ahead of time. And
No.
so having the ability to have flexibility to change without it having to require a bunch of refactoring and rework really helps things out.
Yeah, that's a big thing, right? In terms of being that flexible, especially where a lot of organizations are working in an agile environment, right? They don't want to have to come up with everything up front or want to wait. So being able to, like you said, you get a new industry C, okay, yeah, we can easily adapt that into our architecture and keep on moving forward. So
Yeah, so that's really powerful. So this is what a row access policy looks like. Here's what a column masking policy looks like. I really like how Snowflake does column masking policies based on tags. I think
right,
that is super powerful. The reason for that is that in order to change the column masking policy, you actually have to drop it from the tag or from the thing that it's attached to.
right,
And so if you had the column masking policy directly attached to the column, you would have to go through, if you wanted to update the policy for whatever reason, you would have to go through and drop it from all the columns that it was attached to.
ooh,
With the
yeah,
tag, what's great is you go ahead and you tag everything, you tag the column with whatever tag you're going to use the policy on, and then you attach the column to, sorry, you attach the tag then to the policy. Well, then if
right.
you need to change, you just drop the relationship between the policy and the tag,
Yep.
update, and then reattach, and boom, you're
You
good.
got it. Right, and that's huge because if you were, for example, at a tag called PII name and somebody's name is on 20 tables, that's you might forget one, you might miss one.
Yep.
But like you said, you can have a tag just PII email, and you just change the policy around that, and one one and done. So no, that's a great tip right there. I wasn't aware of that, and so that put into my little mental note there that, oh, that's a great reason. I mean, I like tags just because I found it was just easier to go and tag, but that's another, you know, kind of justification for doing with tags. So no,
Yeah,
great
and I don't
great
know
point.
exactly how. I know that a lot of the governance products out there have the ability to interact directly with this functionality in Snowflake, such that like a business user, maybe if they're in a catalog, a data catalog, they can actually say, "Oh, this column needs to be PII," and then it can actually push down that to Snowflake. I've not personally played with that a bunch,
Yeah.
but that is definitely something I'm interested in learning more about and interested in really investigating because I'm really curious under the covers, what that does, whether you can apply the tags or whether it just attaches a policy directly to the column.
Yeah. I mean, I have seen some third party governance tools um do that. Well, I would say, let's say that, like, claim to do that, and then
Sure.
I've seen more security solutions seem to be, I think, since this capability came out last year, I think you're starting to see some solutions leverage that. But to your point, I have yet to personally myself really dive into it. But it is interesting because in the past you would see, well, we got to put either a layer over this, or we're going to put a product. Like, I got to take the data out of the database, put it
Mhm.
into an intermediary solution, and then give it to the user. Versus, okay, now let's leave the data there. What I like mostly about this is that I'm not physically changing the data, and uh, I I've actually done where you actually, when you go to zero copy clone the data, say for development, that you can have a role where it really truly masks it, because now you can use real production data in a development environment but not expose that data in the clear to your developers. And from a development perspective, that to me is a huge thing, because one of the always biggest struggles has been having production like data in your development environment. um, this to me is a perfect way of bringing that capability to your development process.
Yeah, that is that is such a good point because I think working in data, we have such a different perspective than working in. I come from a software engineering background into data, and so I've always struggled with reconciling that. Whereas, a software engineering, you're building a web app, right? Like that web app doesn't need production data to function. It can
Right,
function on the development data. But if I'm building a data pipeline to get a production report ready, the
right,
development data isn't going to cut it because frequently there's not the quantity, there's not the actual variation in values, there's a ton of stuff that just makes it really difficult. And
Okay.
so to your point, having that zero copy clone and ability to set those masking policies and use the actual production data is so powerful.
Right. And what's great in that scenario is even though my eyeballs can't see the real data when I'm coming out the other end, when you're doing those data pipelines and you're doing those mathematical calculations, the pipeline itself can leverage the real data. So you could be in the background having the pipelines using real data, giving you real results at the same time protecting the sensitivity and being exposed. It's one of the I think it between the marriage between the zero copy cloning and the ability to do these masking policies has been like a from my perspective on projects has been a huge win.
Yeah, and the ability to even set them up in a CI/CD pipeline, I think, is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
I have a client that is using zero copy clone for their deployment pipeline,
Yep.
and it's to allow the ability for like their dev environment not to be down when they're doing a deployment of the new
Right.
model. And it's great because they have actual applications right in their dev environment that are hitting it, so the application can continue to be developed on, but then the deployment is still happening, and it's just phenomenal. Zero copy clone is one of my favorites. I did want to show you. Let's actually look at what this looks like. I have a SQL query here that I can show you that kind of shows the difference between these different roles and what it actually looks like when we do it in person. I think it's
Perfect.
always really powerful to see that. So you can see these are kind of those different roles we were talking about, the different industries. I just like I said, I just attached them to the end and I used a pattern based role. And so I'm going to run this here, make sure I'm in the right. Perfect. So when I run this here, we'll see how fast my internet is today. Basically, I should only be seeing the employer ASO, which you can see that's the key tag here, the ASO. So I'm only seeing those rows, which is awesome. And this is not a PII role, so all the PII is currently masked. And take the PII at a grain of salt. This is just a demo. This is not
Right.
like actual real data here. But let's say, in the future we decided, phone number, maybe it's not PII. It would literally be as simple as doing an alter statement right here. So we could actually run that and just do that in real time here and see. Make sure I know what that. Yeah, it's just phone. I just do unset tag. Let's see how well I can do SQL on the fly when someone's watching. All right, so I did that again, and then let's go back and run this and use this role. And there we have, phone is
Right.
unmasked. I mean, it's just that simple, which I think is so phenomenal. And then, we do the next role. We should only see businesses that have this industry. It's
Yep.
just so handy. I really like using Snowflake's role strategy where, you give when you do this like for testing purposes, and I'm really big on testing. I think it's really important, and I think it's something that we don't talk enough about in the data industry. um, Testing these roles, if you set them up correctly, is super simple. um, Making sure that in your dev environment that there is whatever testing person you're going to have or testing role, they roll up. You give that role the usage of all of the different variations of the roles that have the access policies attached, so that they can literally go through and test these. You could even test these automatically, right? Like you could
Right.
write test cases that would say, okay, use this role, run this query. You should only see this in this column.
Right.
It's really something that could be automated fairly easily.
Yep. And automation is a big thing, right, these days where
Huge.
organizations want to go more at the speed of business and being able to do more frequent deploys and availability to the business. So, being able to automate, that's great. Now, what about performance? You know,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So, kind of like I said before, the more complicated your policy is, the more your performance is going to suffer.
right,
So, for example, the row access policies, I'm going to go back to just so I can show. When we look at this here, what's interesting is that, so right here, we only are looking at, darn it, we're only looking at one column,
right.
right? We're only basing our row access policy on one column. Now, you can base it off of multiple columns. You can't have multiple row access policies per view, but you could put multiple columns in here.
Gotcha.
And then you would have to have logic that says if column A is this and column B is this, or if column A is this or column B is this. The more complex that logic gets, the more the performance is going to suffer. So
Gotcha.
you do want to have some sense of optimization when you're doing that, of really thinking, okay, I don't want to put you can do some work in the data, right? Like you could, if you knew that you were going to have 4 columns that depended on it, you could do some sort of concatenation column
Right.
that you would then only be accessing the one column and doing your logic on that. uh, I do think the goal would be to get it right first and then to make it fast.
Right.
So you definitely want to make sure, okay, write your column policy. Don't worry about optimizing for speed until you've gotten it accurate. And
Yeah.
then when the performance issue occurs, there's multiple things you can do, right? Like Snowflake obviously has the ability to up warehousing sizes.
Right.
You can look at optimizing the SQL as well.
Yeah.
And Snowflake does have that great ability to look at the query. I don't remember if it's called the query plan, but like where it
Right.
shows you that if there's spillage to disk, or if there's where the bottleneck is. And so
Right.
those are things that you can start then investigating after you implement the policies.
Right. Do you know? My assumption is going to be no, because it's not physical data. But is it captured in the cache, or when you run those queries, does it still have to calculate the policy, even if the results were cached before that?
That's a great question. I believe it still has to run the policies.
Yeah.
Um, but that is an excellent question, and I'm curious now. I'm
Yeah.
I'm going to go look
that
that up after this and see if I can find the answer.
that's my
Um,
assumption as well. It just kind of popped in my head, but based on I'm understanding all the cache. But yeah, it is kind of curious, because if you have complex, does it run it every time, or does it cache it? So
yeah,
there's a little investigation for you.
or like maybe even could you run a query? Could you run the same query, previously, and it would cache those results, and then would the policy hit the
Yeah.
cache? I don't know.
I don't know.
So yeah,
Inquisitive minds want to know. Yeah, so
they
there's
do.
little little
Yes,
little action item for you after the thing. So,
I love
but
that.
no, but I think we are running out of time here. But I do appreciate you coming on. Is there any place where people might be able to find information on this, that you might have, that people can look up, either stuff that you've built or shared?
Yeah, I actually have a Medium blog, and I post on my Medium blog. I actually have a series on data governance on there, and it has links to a GitHub repository
Oh, great,
as well. And so you can actually download the GitHub and start playing with things.
great.
What is the best way for me to share that with
Well,
people?
what we're going to do is, after with this recording, down below in the comments, we will put all of the links for people to
Perfect.
to have. So we'll capture that when we publish this. But that's great. Are you going to be at Summit at all this year?
I will be at Summit.
Nice.
Yes, I'm super excited. This is my second year at Summit. It was a great time last year, and I'm
Right.
really looking even more forward this year to going as a data superhero and um, making all sorts of fun connections and hobnobbing with fellow superheroes
Yes.
and hearing some great presentations.
Yeah. No, it's going to be great. I'm going to be there. This was going to be my first. I didn't get to go last year, but this year, same with me. So I'm excited and look forward to seeing you and the other superheroes there. But again, thanks, Julie, for joining us today. It was a great topic, great conversation, and thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.